We have received confirmation that a member of AFGE Local 3669, Alex J. Preddy, was the man killed during the incident. At this time, many of the details remain unclear. What we do know is this: a member of our union lost their life today, and that alone is devastating. Our hearts are heavy, and we are deeply stricken by this tragedy that has befallen one of our own. Joining us now is Minnesota State Representative Aisha Gomez, who represents parts of Minneapolis. Aisha, where to begin? I know that you have been incredibly busy, not just speaking to reporters like me, but to constituents, to the people that you serve. So I guess let me just begin with, how are you doing?
It's been hard even just to watch the conversation that preceded me. And, Alex was talking to two women in the street who were saying, one of them was a preschool teacher, and, and they felt like they had to be out bearing witness to what's happening in our city. And I'm thankful to you for talking to me and for the analysis and sharing what's happening in our city, because it has implications for what's happening in our country. They killed a man in the street in front of a donut shop on a Saturday morning. They, as you've pointed out, immediately lied about what had happened. They have already begun to try to smear him. They have told lies. They called him a domestic terrorist, which is what they did to Renee Good, a shooting that also happened in my district. And, our community we are grief-stricken, we are heartbroken, but we are resolute that this cannot stand. This cannot stand in our neighborhoods. It can't stand in our country. This is completely out of control. And we have, the propaganda machine is working. They're trying to spin this story, and it's not going to work. Alex Preddy should be with us. Renee Good should be with us. And ICE should not be terrorizing our communities. And I just have to sound an alarm. This is happening right now in Minneapolis, but it could be any city in the country. And, I am so incredibly proud of Alex and of Renee and of the tens of thousands of Minnesotans all across the state, really, who are coming out, who are showing up to bear witness to this invasion, who are showing up to protect their neighbors. There were 100,000 people out in the street in negative 20 degrees yesterday. That is the determination of Minneapolis, and that is what is true about us as a state and as a country, and it's true about us as humans. We are being asked to engage in dehumanization and brutality toward our neighbors, because that is what these masked secret police are showing to us in our streets, and we're rejecting it, and we're saying no. And we are showing up with love and care. And, you can hear, I'm so upset, but I was out for hours this morning in my community with people saying no to this, and we're not going inside. We're not going to allow even this atrocity will not drive us away from our goal, which is to get ICE out of Minnesota and to see justice in our country and to stop this authoritarian regime on the march.
Can I ask you bluntly, what do you think is happening to our country right now? What's Minnesota's message? What does it represent for everyone?
Yeah, it's a good question. This started months ago. Authoritarian regimes oftentimes do what this one has done. They scapegoat a minority, in this case, Somali Americans. At the same time, of course, they, kicked tens of millions of Americans off of healthcare in order to fund this secret police force that's now killing Americans in the street, and to give tax breaks to their billionaire friends.
Exactly 1 week after Good's death, on January 14, 2026, A third shooting involving federal agents occurred in North Minneapolis. According to the Department of Homeland Security, ICE officers were attempting to conduct a traffic stop on a Venezuelan national when the individual fled in a vehicle. After a car chase, the man crashed into a parked car and fled on foot. Federal officials stated that a struggle ensued in front of a residence where two other individuals attacked the officer with a snow shovel and broom handle. In response to this alleged attack, the ICE agent shot the man, later identified as Julio Cesar Sosa Celis, in the leg. The wounded man went inside the residence and initially refused to come out, but federal agents entered the residence and he was subsequently transported to a hospital where he survived his injuries. The January 14th shooting sparked another wave of protest near the scene in North Minneapolis. Federal agents deployed tear gas to disperse crowds, while protesters threw rocks and fireworks at law enforcement. The clashes continued into the early morning hours. One family reported that ICE agents deployed a tear gas munition under their vehicle as unrest unfolded, resulting in their 6 children being transported to a hospital. Following this incident, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey stated that the ICE deployment to Minneapolis was not sustainable and was putting the city in an impossible situation, while calling for protests to remain peaceful. On January 15, President Donald Trump publicly threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act, a rarely used law that would allow the deployment of federal military troops domestically to suppress civil disorder. This threat came in response to the ongoing protests and what the administration characterized as resistance to federal law enforcement operations. The threat to deploy active-duty military forces into American cities to support immigration enforcement operations raised serious constitutional concerns among legal scholars and civil liberties advocates. The most recent and second fatal shooting occurred on January 24, 2026, just one day after tens of thousands of people had marched peacefully through downtown Minneapolis in frigid weather, demanding that ICE leave the state. The incident happened around 9 a.m. near the intersection of Nicollet Avenue and West 26th Street in South Minneapolis, just over a mile from where Renee Good had been killed 17 days earlier. The victim was identified as Alex Jeffrey Preddy, a 37-year-old U.S. citizen who worked as an intensive care unit nurse at the Minneapolis Veterans Administration Hospital. According to the Department of Homeland Security, Border Patrol agents were conducting a targeted immigration enforcement operation in the area when Preddy approached them armed with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun and 2 loaded magazines. Federal officials claimed that when agents attempted to disarm Preddy, he violently resisted their efforts. Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino stated that fearing for his life and the lives and safety of fellow officers, an agent fired defensive shots. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem characterized Preddy's actions as domestic terrorism, stating that he had arrived at the scene to inflict maximum damage on individuals, and that this individual who came with weapons and ammunition to stop a law enforcement operation of federal law enforcement officers committed an act of domestic terrorism. However, when pressed by reporters, neither Bovino nor Noem would answer questions about whether Preddy ever actually brandished the gun before the encounter. Multiple bystander videos that were recorded from different angles and verified by news organizations tell a markedly different story from the federal account. The footage shows Preddy filming with his cell phone as federal agents pushed and shoved protesters. In the videos, Preddy can be seen holding his phone in his right hand while trying to help other protesters who have been pushed to the ground by agents. As Preddy moves between the agents and the protesters, attempting to shield people, an agent pepper sprays him directly in the face. The videos clearly show Preddy with his cell phone in his right hand and his empty left hand raised above his head while he is being pepper sprayed. At no point in any of the publicly available video footage does Preddy appear to be holding or brandishing a firearm. The videos then show approximately 7 federal officers surrounding Preddy and taking him down to the pavement. Multiple officers are seen on top of him, with one officer appearing to strike Preddy near the head several times. As the officers attempt to bring Preddy's arms behind his back, he appears to resist. Then, gunshots ring out. Analysis of the video shows at least 10 shots were fired at Preddy while he was on the ground surrounded by agents. After the shooting, the officers back away, and Pretty lies motionless on the street. A federal agent can be seen emerging from the scuffle with a gun in his hand and turning away from Pretty when the first shot is fired. Pretty's parents identified their son and spoke to the press about his character and motivations. His father, Michael Pretty, told reporters that Alex cared about people deeply and was very upset with what was happening in Minneapolis and throughout the United States with ICE. He described his son as someone who thought the immigration enforcement tactics were terrible, including what he characterized as kidnapping children and grabbing people off the street. Alex Pretty had participated in protests following the January 7 killing of Renee Good because he cared about those people and knew what was happening was wrong, according to his father. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara confirmed that Pretty was a lawful gun owner with a valid permit to carry a firearm. Minnesota law permits the open carrying of handguns as long as the gun owner has a valid permit. O'Hara stated that Pretty had no criminal record other than traffic violations. The police chief also revealed that federal officials had blocked Minneapolis police from accessing the crime scene, a serious breach of protocol that raised concerns about evidence preservation and the integrity of any investigation. Governor Tim Walz reviewed the videos of the shooting and stated that what he saw with his own eyes made the federal claims of self-defense very hard to believe. He characterized the federal narrative as nonsense and lies, saying, "Thank God we have video, because according to DHS, these 7 heroic guys took an onslaught of a battalion against them or something. It's nonsense, people. It is nonsense, and it's lies." Walz announced that Minnesota would lead the investigation into Pretty's death and repeatedly called on President Trump to end Operation Metro Surge and withdraw the thousands of federal agents from the state. Within hours of Pretty's shooting, hundreds of protesters gathered at the scene. Federal agents deployed tear gas and stun grenades to disperse the crowds, leading to clashes that continued throughout the day. At least one person was pepper sprayed, and 2 protesters were arrested after attempting to cross police tape. As night fell, the crowd grew to include hundreds of people who gathered quietly around a growing memorial at the site of the shooting. Some carried signs saying, "Justice for Alex Pretty," while others chanted both Pretty's and Good's names. Local businesses, including a donut shop and clothing store, stayed open to offer protesters a warm place, along with water, coffee, and snacks. The Hennepin County Attorney's Office and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension filed an emergency lawsuit in federal court, seeking to prevent the destruction of evidence related to Pretty's shooting. Federal Judge Eric C. Tostrad issued a temporary restraining order enjoining the Department of Homeland Security and federal agents from destroying or altering evidence related to the fatal shooting, including evidence that federal officials removed from the scene or took into their exclusive custody. A hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. This legal action was necessary, according to state officials, because federal authorities were blocking state investigators from accessing crime scenes and preserving evidence. The political response to these shootings has been sharply divided along partisan lines. President Trump and senior members of his administration have vigorously defended the federal agents involved in all 3 shootings. Trump posted on social media after Pretty's death, sharing images of what federal officials claimed was the gun recovered at the scene and asking, "What is that all about? Where are the local police? Why weren't they allowed to protect ICE officers?" He accused Governor Walz and Mayor Fry of inciting insurrection with their pompous, dangerous, and arrogant rhetoric. White House advisor Stephen Miller claimed, without providing evidence, that Pretty was a domestic terrorist who tried to assassinate federal law enforcement. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who was born in Minneapolis, posted, "Thank God for the patriots of ICE. We have your back 100%. You are saving the country. Shame on the leadership of Minnesota and the lunatics in the street." Congressional Democrats responded with outrage and demands for accountability. Representative Robert Garcia, the top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, called for ICE to be abolished and for Secretary Noem to be impeached, stating that Trump has created a militarized police force accountable only to him and ready to murder people in our streets. Representative Brad Schneider, chair of the moderate New Democratic Coalition, called for every agent involved in Pretty's shooting to be suspended, pending a full and independent investigation, and ultimately held accountable for their actions. He also called for Secretary Noem to resign or be fired, stating, "If not, Congress must act." Representative Robin Kelly of Illinois introduced articles of impeachment against Secretary Noem on January 14th, citing obstruction of congressional oversight and violations of public trust. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer both called for criminal investigations, while Representative Ro Khanna stated that the agent who shot Good needs to be arrested and he needs to be prosecuted. He needs to be put on trial. Public reaction has extended beyond politics into American culture. Multiple prominent musicians and artists have spoken out against the federal operations in Minneapolis. On January 17th, at a concert in New Jersey, Bruce Springsteen dedicated his song, "The Promised Land," to Renee Good. Speaking to his audience, Springsteen said, "If you believe in the power of law and that no one stands above it, if you stand against heavily armed, massed federal troops invading an American city using Gestapo tactics against our fellow citizens, if you believe you don't deserve to be murdered for exercising your American right to protest, then send a message to this president." As the mayor of the city said, ICE should get the fuck out of Minneapolis. Other artists, including Billie Eilish, Dave Matthews, and Neil Young, publicly condemned ICE following the shootings. Public opinion polling has shown significant skepticism about the federal government's justification for these shootings. A poll conducted between January 16 and 19 by YouGov and The Economist of 1,722 adult U.S. citizens found that only 29% of Americans believe that Renee Good posed a threat to the agents, while 66% say the shooter should be investigated. These numbers suggest that the federal narrative has failed to convince most Americans, even as the administration continues to defend its agents' actions. The situation in Minneapolis represents an unprecedented breakdown in federal-state cooperation on law enforcement matters. State and local officials have accused federal agents of operating outside constitutional bounds, blocking local investigations, and using excessive force against both immigrants and U.S. citizens. The deployment of thousands of heavily armed federal agents into American communities, the fatal shootings of U.S. citizens engaged in protest activities, the mass resignations of career federal prosecutors, and the threat to invoke the Insurrection Act have combined to create what many observers characterize as a constitutional crisis.